So, imagine logging into a telehealth portal, right? Your camera flicks on, and instead of, a tired doctor who's rushing through a 10-minute block, you are greeted by an entity that literally watches how you breathe.
Right.
It analyzes the slight wince when you move your shoulder, and it seamlessly correctly diagnoses a torn rotator cuff before a human being even enters the chat. I mean, it sounds completely like science fiction.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds like something out of a movie.
Yeah, but as of April 2026, research indicates an AI system is already outperforming human primary care physicians in dozens of clinical metrics during simulated patient encounters.
It really is. The technological leap here is staggering. We are moving from artificial intelligence as this like static medical encyclopedia to artificial intelligence as an active, observant participant in a live clinical environment.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental shift in the whole computational approach to healthcare delivery. Yeah.
And honestly, that shift is arriving not a moment too soon. We need to set the stakes for this deep dive immediately for you listening, because the World Health Organization has issued a staggering projection. They're predicting a global shortfall of more than 10 million health workers by the year 2030.
10 million.
10 million. And we aren't just talking about, slightly longer wait times at your local clinic. That is the structural collapse of primary and acute care funnels on a massive global scale.
It is. Because when you remove 10 million professionals from the global health equation, you are essentially dismantling the bedrock of preventative medicine.
Yeah.
You lose chronic disease management, you lose early diagnostic intervention. And patients who cannot access primary care, well, they inevitably end up in emergency departments with much more severe advanced conditions.
Which just overloads the system even more.
Exactly, which in turn overloads the acute care infrastructure. It's a cascading failure.
Totally. So our mission today in this deep dive is to explore how the medical and technological communities are attempting to bridge this terrifying gap, right? And doing it without sacrificing the quality of care you receive.
Right.
Our source material today is a really comprehensive April 2026 research update from Google DeepMind, and they're introducing what they call the AI Co-Clinician. But we have to address the elephant in the room here.
We do.
For the last few years, the prevailing narrative has positioned AI as like the ultimate silver bullet for medicine.
Yeah, the hype cycle has been incredibly pervasive. I mean, the assumption was that large language models would immediately democratize medical expertise overnight.
Right, just ask a chatbot and you're cured.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the reality on the ground, inside actual clinics, has been starkly different. AI has largely failed to meet the rigorous, practical needs of practicing physicians and patients.
It's been clunky, it hallucinates, it just, it doesn't integrate well into the frantic workflow of a hospital. So today, we are going to dissect exactly why previous iterations of medical AI hit a wall and how this new AI co-clinician architecture from DeepMind is attempting to basically rewrite the foundation of clinical artificial intelligence.
Which is much needed.
Yeah. We're going to look at the progression of the tech, the rigorous new testing frameworks, and the really complex reality of deploying an AI with, eyes, ears, and a voice.
And to understand the significance of this April 2026 update,
Yeah.
we really have to contextualize it within the broader evolutionary timeline of medical AI.
Right.
Because the current co-clinician architecture, it didn't just emerge in a vacuum. The course material maps out a very specific incremental journey, and it begins with a system known as MedPaLM.
Okay, let's unpack this progression, because MedPaLM was essentially the first major milestone mentioned in the text. Its primary objective was mastering multiple-choice medical board exams, right?
Yeah.
It demonstrated that a model could ingest a vast corpus of medical literature and accurately select the correct answer from options A, B, C, or D.
And from a purely natural language processing perspective, that was a watershed moment.
Oh, for sure.
It proved the model could encode and retrieve really complex medical knowledge. However, identifying the correct answer when the parameters of the problem are neatly predefined is a fundamentally different cognitive task than diagnosing an actual patient.
Right. It's like the difference between passing your written driving test and actually merging onto a crowded highway in the pouring rain.
That's a great way to put it.
MedPaLM basically sits in a digital room, processes a highly structured question, and picks an option. But patients, well, they don't present with multiple choice symptoms.
No, they do not.
They present with messy, conflicting narratives. My stomach hurts, but also my arm feels weird and I'm tired.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which forced the next evolutionary step outlined in the research, which was the AMIE system. AMIE.
Yeah.
And AMIE transitioned the objective from static question answering to dynamic text-based simulated consultations.
So AME had to essentially act out a clinical vignette via a text chat.
Precisely. And moving to a simulated chat required the introduction of clinical reasoning algorithms. The system had to iteratively gather a patient's history, formulate follow-up questions based on the previous responses, and, actively construct a differential diagnosis in real time.
Right.
It forced the model to navigate the ambiguity of an unfolding conversation.
But even a highly sophisticated text chat has strict limitations, right? I mean, text is a really low bandwidth medium for medicine. And this realization brings us to the core philosophical framework driving the new AI co-clinician. DeepMind characterizes this approach as triadic care.
Yes. What's fascinating here is that the triadic care model is perhaps the most crucial conceptual shift in this entire research update. Well, the traditional medical paradigm is a dyad, right? It's a direct two-way interaction between the clinician and the patient. But DeepMind is architecting a triad.
Okay.
The patient remains at the center. The AI agent operates as a highly integrated assistant, managing the information flow, and the human physician retains the ultimate clinical authority.
You know, the source material uses a very specific phrase that stood out to me. They state, medicine has always been a team sport.
Yes.
They are intentionally framing the AI not as an autonomous replacement for the doctor, but as a teammate.
And the designation of teammate is a deeply strategic choice. It's rooted heavily in systems engineering and risk mitigation.
Because of the liability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you design an AI to be an autonomous practitioner, you are engineering a single point of failure. The AI bears the entire cognitive and operational burden of the diagnosis and the treatment plan. And given the current limitations of generative models, that is just an unacceptable risk profile.
The liability would be astronomical. I mean, if an autonomous AI misses a rare cancer diagnosis, the entire system is culpable.
But by designing this system as a co-clinician, as a teammate, you integrate the AI's core strengths, which are massive data synthesis, pattern recognition, and semantic retrieval.
Right.
You integrate those with the human physician's core strengths, which are intuitive judgment, physical assessment, and empathetic contextualization.
So the AI processes the sheer volume of data, effectively extending the physician's cognitive reach.
Yes.
Which directly addresses that 10 million worker shortfall we discussed at the start.
Exactly. The human acts as the team captain, providing that final layer of clinical verification.
That structural dynamic makes perfect sense. You have a supercomputer handling the exhaustive chart reviews and the background literature searches in real time, handing the doctor exactly what they need.
Precisely.
But, any team is only as strong as its weakest link. For a physician to actually utilize this AI teammate in a high-stakes clinical environment, they have to trust it implicitly.
Absolutely.
If the AI feeds the doctor incorrect data, or, say, fails to mention a critical piece of the patient's history, the whole triadic model collapses.
And trust cannot just be assumed in medical software. It has to be empirically engineered and rigorously validated, which leads directly into how DeepMind actually evaluated the safety of the co-clinician.
Right.
They collaborated with academic physicians to deploy a highly specific evaluation framework known as no harm.
The no harm framework. So this is where we transition from the theory of triadic care to the actual clinical reality of testing it. Because the framework specifically targets two distinct categories of failure, right? Errors of commission and errors of omission.
Yeah, and understanding the mechanistic difference between those two error types is absolutely essential for grasping the complexity of medical AI. So let's examine errors of commission first.
Okay.
A commission error occurs when the model actively generates incorrect, fabricated, or just actively harmful information.
So in standard generative AI terminology, these are often referred to as hallucinations.
Correct. The model confidently outputs a token sequence that just does not align with factual reality. In a clinical setting, an error of commission is a proactive threat. It is the AI suggesting a dosage of 500 milligrams when the clinical guideline dictates 50 milligrams. Or it's the AI confidently misidentifying the visual presentation of a rash.
It's the AI taking an action that directly introduces harm into the patient's care pathway.
Exactly.
But the no harm framework places equal, if not greater, emphasis on errors of omission. And evaluating an AI for an omission seems like an exponentially more difficult computational challenge.
Oh, it is the defining challenge of clinical AI safety. An error of omission is the failure to surface critical, potentially life-altering information that the model should have identified given the context.
Wow, yeah.
It's the AI failing to ask about a patient's history of smoking when they present with a persistent cough. Or it's the AI failing to flag a severe drug interaction between a newly proposed medication and some supplement the patient mentioned, like 20 minutes earlier in the transcript.
Right, because computationalizing an error of omission requires the system to understand the negative space of a conversation.
Yes, the negative space.
To prevent a commission error, the AI essentially just needs a robust fact-checking mechanism for the words it is currently generating, right?
Pretty much.
But to prevent an omission, it has to construct a massive, multidimensional map of every possible clinical pathway for that specific patient and constantly monitor that map to see if a critical node is missing from the current discussion.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize the architecture. The model has to possess an internalized representation of optimal clinical workflows.
Right.
It must constantly anticipate what a human expert would require next to safely advance the consultation. It requires proactive, lateral reasoning across the entire context window of the patient's data, rather than just reactive generation to a direct prompt.
So how did they construct a test to measure these omissions and commissions reliably? The source details an evaluation involving 98 realistic primary care queries. And these were not simple, generalized medical trivia questions.
Not at all. The methodology is the critical factor here. These 98 queries were curated from diverse medical sources to reflect the genuine complexity of primary care. And primary care is arguably the most difficult domain to model because the presentation is entirely undifferentiated.
What do you mean by undifferentiated?
Well, a patient walks in with fatigue. That could be anything from a mild viral infection to a late-stage leukemia.
Oh, right. The search space for a diagnosis is massive.
Exactly. So to evaluate the AI's performance on these 98 complex queries, the attending physicians utilized a multi-step, iterative process to develop what the text describes as query-specific answer metrics.
So they didn't just use like a universal standardized grading rubric for all 98 scenarios.
No, a generalized rubric would be completely insufficient for this level of analysis. For every single one of the 98 scenarios, the panel of expert physicians conducted comprehensive background research to map out the exact parameters of a clinically perfect response. They defined, in exhaustive detail, what specific pieces of information constituted an error of commission for that specific scenario, and what specific missing data points constituted an error of omission.
So they essentially built 98 unique, hyper-rigid obstacle courses.
Yes, exactly.
It's an incredibly high bar. And they conducted this as a head-to-head blind evaluation, right?
Yes, they did.
The grading physicians were presented with responses, but they were blinded as to whether the response was generated by the new AI Co-Clinician or by leading evidence synthesis tools that human doctors are already actively using in their practices today.
And the blinding is essential to remove human bias regarding artificial intelligence. And the results from this rigorous evaluation are highly illuminating. The panel of physicians consistently preferred the responses generated by the AI Co-Clinician over the existing synthesis tools.
But the most striking data point from the evaluation of those 98 queries is the critical error rate. According to the source, the AI Co-Clinician recorded 0 critical errors in 97 out of the 98 cases.
A near-perfect safety profile against a brutally strict set of query-specific metrics.
Yeah.
And the text notes, this represents a significant measurable improvement over the 2 different AI systems currently utilized by physicians.
Wait a second, though. 97 out of 98 means there was 1 critical error.
Yes.
That is roughly a 1% critical error rate. If my human doctor committed a critical error in 1 out of every 100 interactions I had with them, I would immediately seek out a new physician and probably a malpractice attorney.
Fair point.
Is a 1% error rate actually acceptable in a medical context?
It's a vital question, and it cuts to the core of how we evaluate risk in emerging technologies.
Oh.
To answer it, we have to look closely at the parameters of that specific error. The source text specifies that the evaluation characterized consensus scenario-specific errors.
Okay, what does that actually mean in plain language?
It means the error was not necessarily the AI suggesting something objectively lethal, like prescribing a failed dose of insulin to a non-diabetic.
Oh.
The error means the AI failed to hit a highly specific, nuanced metric of perfection that a panel of top-tier attending physicians had predetermined was necessary for that exact, highly complex scenario.
So the AI might have successfully diagnosed the primary issue and suggested a safe treatment, but perhaps it missed a secondary recommendation regarding a long-term lifestyle intervention that the panel deemed critical for a complete Perfect answer.
That is the most likely nature of a consensus scenario-specific error in this context. And furthermore, we must evaluate this performance not against a theoretical standard of utter infallibility, but against the actual documented standard of care currently provided by human clinicians and existing technological tools.
Because human doctors are not operating with a 0% critical error rate.
They absolutely are not.
Yeah.
Diagnostic errors, prescription errors, and omissions of critical history are well-documented systemic issues in global healthcare. The fact that the AI Co-Clinician significantly improved upon the safety metrics of two systems already relied upon by doctors demonstrates that the underlying architecture is successfully driving down the error rate.
So it's a net positive.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a research milestone proving that the triadic model can elevate the baseline of safety, even if it hasn't achieved absolute perfection in the most complex edge cases.
Right. The goal isn't immediate perfection. The goal is measurable, continuous reduction of systemic risk.
Exactly.
Now, beyond synthesizing patient histories and navigating differential diagnoses, there is another incredibly dense, high-stakes domain of primary care, and that's pharmacology.
Oh, yes.
The text highlights that answering queries regarding medications and therapeutic interventions is notoriously challenging for artificial intelligence models.
Pharmacology is an unforgiving domain for language models because it relies on rigid quantitative data rather than semantic interpretation. A language model is fundamentally designed to predict the next most likely word based on patterns in its training data. But pharmacology requires absolute precision regarding dosages, half-lives, renal clearance rates, and highly specific cytochrome P450 drug interactions.
You can't just guess the most likely dosage based on, like, the vibe of the sentence.
No, definitely not.
You need the exact milligram count adjusted for the patient's specific kidney function.
Precisely. So to test the AI's competency in this rigid domain, DeepMind utilized the OpenFDA set of RxQA questions. This is a rigorous benchmark designed to evaluate complex medication knowledge.
Okay.
And the source reviews a fascinating detail regarding how this benchmark is historically administered. Originally, the RxQA was formatted as a multiple-choice test.
And here's the detail that should give everyone pause. On that original multiple-choice version of the RxQA, practicing, human primary care physicians achieved only modest scores.
Yeah, that data point powerfully illustrates the sheer cognitive load required to maintain comprehensive pharmacological knowledge. Even experienced, practicing physicians struggle to recall the exact parameters of complex drug interactions when presented with a multiple-choice evaluation.
But the clinical reality is far more complicated than a multiple-choice test. In the middle of a busy clinic, a doctor doesn't have 4 neat options to choose from when they need to prescribe a new anticoagulant to a patient with a history of gastrointestinal bleeding.
Right.
They have to formulate the entire plan from scratch.
Clinical medicine is fundamentally an open-ended generative task, not a multiple-choice classification task. The practitioner must pull the required information from the void.
So recognizing this, the researchers evaluated the AI Co-Clinician on the significantly more difficult task of answering open-ended medication questions. They stripped away the multiple-choice options and forced the AI to generate the complete pharmacological reasoning.
And the results were exceptional. The AI surpassed other frontier models on this open-ended task.
Wow.
More importantly, the text explicitly concludes that the AI Co-Clinician can mirror human physician proficiency in these highly complex aspects of clinical reasoning regarding medications.
Matching human proficiency in open-ended pharmacological reasoning is a massive milestone. It means the AI can act as a reliable, real-time safety check for prescription management, instantly verifying dosages against a patient's entire metabolic profile.
Absolutely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because if we step back and look at everything we have analyzed so far, the MedPaLM exams, the AMIE text chats, the no-harm omissions framework, the open-ended RxQA tests, they all share one fundamental structural limitation.
Yes.
They are all entirely text-based.
They're operating within a monomodal constraint. They process alphanumeric characters and nothing else.
But as the source material brilliantly emphasizes, the actual practice of medicine is profoundly multimodal. A clinician's diagnostic capability relies heavily on subtle visual and auditory data streams that can never be fully captured in a text transcript.
The physical examination begins the moment the patient crosses the threshold of the clinic.
Right.
The physician observes the patient's gait, their posture, the presence of an involuntary tremor, the pallor of their skin, the specific acoustic quality of a chronic cough or the distinct pattern of their speech.
So attempting to build an AI co-clinician that can only read text is like forcing a human doctor to diagnose a complex neurological condition while locked in a soundproof, windowless room, relying entirely on transcribed notes slipped under the door.
That's a great analogy.
It strips away 50% of the diagnostic data.
Yes. So to solve this fundamental limitation, DeepMind transitioned the AI co-clinician architecture into the realm of real-time multimodal telemedicine. They provided the system with the computational equivalent of eyes, ears, and a voice.
The source outlines a massive collaboration with academic physicians at Harvard, Stanford, and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center to test this multimodal capability. They built the system upon the architecture of Gemini and Project Astra.
And integrating those models is what allows for the real-time processing of disparate data streams. Multimodal AI does not simply translate speech to text and then process the text.
Right, it's deeper than that.
It actively processes the raw audio waveforms to detect tone, cadence, and distress. Simultaneously, it runs computer vision algorithms over a live video feed to track human pose estimation, object recognition, and subtle visual anomalies.
Wow.
And it does all of this while generating a natural language audio response with ultra-low latency.
The computational orchestration required to keep those streams synchronized in real time is mind-bending.
It really is.
So to test if this actually worked in a clinical setting, they designed an incredibly robust study. The text describes it as a randomized, interface-blinded crossover simulation study involving 120 hypothetical telemedical encounters.
The experimental design is meticulous. By utilizing a crossover methodology, they ensured that the AI and the human physicians were evaluated against the exact same set of clinical challenges.
Which mitigates any variance in scenario difficulty.
Exactly.
The study pitted real primary care physicians against the AI co-clinician and also against another system called GPT real-time. But the most brilliant aspect of the study design involves the individuals playing the patients. They didn't just hire local actors.
No, they did.
They utilized a pool of internal medicine residents to act as the patient actors.
That is a critical methodological choice. If you hire a professional actor to simulate a myocardial infarction, they might simply clutch their chest and groan.
Right, like a soap opera.
Exactly. But an internal medicine resident understands the intricate pathophysiology of the disease. They know exactly how to simulate the subtle diaphoresis, the sweating, the specific radiation of the pain into the jaw, and the precise type of shortness of breath.
So they can dynamically respond to a clinician's line of questioning in a medically accurate manner, providing a truly high-fidelity simulation of an undifferentiated patient.
Yes. These resident actors enacted 20 standardized outpatient scenarios, covering a wide spectrum of clinical conditions. And the source specifically notes that these scenarios were deliberately engineered to require proactive auditory and visual reasoning.
So the AI couldn't just sit there passively processing text. It had to actively observe the video feed and listen to the audio cues to solve the case.
And the text provides two specific illustrative examples of this multimodal reasoning that really highlight the transformative nature of this technology.
Okay, let's hear them.
In the first example, the AI co-clinician successfully observed a patient and corrected their inhaler technique in real time over the video feed.
The level of spatial and clinical awareness required for that interaction is staggering. Think about the chain of events the AI has to execute perfectly.
Right.
First, the computer vision model has to accurately identify the specific type of inhaler the patient is holding. Then, it has to track the patient's biomechanics, how they're gripping the device, the angle of their head, the synchronization of their finger pressing the canister with the exact moment of inhalation.
It is running a continuous comparison between the real-time physical actions it is observing and an internalized database of optimal mechanical protocols for that specific medical device.
And when it detects a deviation, say the patient exhales too quickly, the AI has to immediately formulate a corrective instruction and synthesize an audio response with the appropriate tone to gently guide the patient back to the correct technique.
Without causing frustration, exactly. It's the seamless integration of visual tracking, clinical rule matching, and conversational generation.
Incredible. And the second example?
The second example, detailed in the text, pushes this capability even further. The AI successfully guided a patient through specific shoulder maneuvers to accurately identify a rotator cuff injury.
This moves beyond simple object tracking and into the realm of dynamic orthopedic examination. The AI has to verbally instruct the patient to perform specific spatial movements, like elevate your arm laterally to 90 degrees or internally rotate your wrist.
It then has to visually monitor the patient's range of motion, observe the biomechanical limitations, and crucially, watch for subtle facial microexpressions indicating pain or guarding during specific arcs of movement.
It then synthesizes all of that visual and auditory data to deduce which specific tendon within the rotator cuff complex is most likely compromised. It is acting as a highly trained, deeply observant physical therapist conducting an intake assessment through a webcam.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of the study. How did the AI co-clinician's performance compare to the expert human physicians in these 120 rigorous telemedical encounters?
The evaluation process for these encounters was incredibly granular. They didn't simply grade the encounters on a pass-fail basis for the correct diagnosis. The source states they assessed over 140 specific aspects of consultation skill.
140 distinct variables tracked across every single encounter.
Wow.
These aspects span 7 broad domains of consultation quality. To quantify the performance, the graders utilized an anchored 0 to 2 scoring system.
So a score of 0 represented an omission, meaning the clinician completely failed to address a critical aspect.
Yes.
A1 represented a partial completion, meaning they touched on the issue but missed important nuance. And a 2 represented fully appropriate performance.
When the final data from the 120 encounters was analyzed across all 140 aspects, the overarching verdict was clear. The expert human physicians performed better than the AI system overall.
So the human clinicians retained the crown in the multimodal arena, but the details of where they excelled are exactly what proves the necessity of the triadic model.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the analysis of the performance gap is highly revealing. The human physicians demonstrated a distinct superiority in 2 critical areas: identifying red flags and guiding complex physical examinations.
Okay, let's talk about that. The concept of the red flag is fundamental to emergency and primary care triage. The AI might be excellent at following a standard diagnostic algorithm, but humans possess an intuitive pattern recognition for subtle anomalies.
Yes. A red flag is a clinical indicator that strongly suggests a severe, immediately life-threatening underlying pathology that is masquerading as a common complaint.
Like what?
Well, for instance, a patient might present via telemedicine complaining of simple mid-back pain, which is statistically most likely a musculoskeletal strain. However, if the patient casually mentions a recent subtle change in their voice or a slight difficulty swallowing, a human physician's internal alarm bells instantly ring for a potential thoracic aortic dissection.
So the human doctor instantly abandons the routine back pain questionnaire and pivots the entire consultation to rule out a catastrophic vascular event.
Exactly. Human clinicians are trained over thousands of hours of real-world exposure to listen for those discordant, out-of-context details.
Right.
Current AI models, while vast in their knowledge bases, often struggle to dynamically break out of their primary contextual flow when a subtle red flag is dropped into the conversation. They tend to adhere too rigidly to the most statistically probable pathway.
Which can lead to an error of omission regarding the low-probability, high-risk event.
Yes. And while the AI successfully guided a shoulder exam, the human doctors were still vastly superior at guiding comprehensive physical examinations. There is an inherent friction in humans communicating physical instructions to other humans over a camera that a machine hasn't fully mastered yet.
That makes sense. A doctor can intuitively read a patient's confusion and instantly rephrase an instruction, or recognize when a patient is subconsciously compensating for an injury and direct them to isolate the movement.
The source text clearly concludes from these findings that the AI systems are currently best utilized as supportive tools for practitioners, rather than replacements for clinical judgment. The human capacity for intuitive triage and nuanced physical direction remains unparalleled.
However, we cannot ignore the staggering counter-statistic buried within the results of this simulation.
No, we can't.
Yes, the humans won the overall assessment, but the AI co-clinician performed at a level comparable to or explicitly exceeding the primary care physicians in 68 of those 140 assessed areas.
68 out of 140 is nearly 50%. In roughly half of the evaluated metrics comprising a high-quality clinical consultation, The AI is already operating at parity or superiority to expert human physicians.
That is a phenomenal achievement for a technology in its relative infancy. And while the text doesn't exhaustively list all 68 metrics, the structural strengths of large language models allow us to understand exactly where the AI is dominating.
Right.
AI systems possess infinite patience and perfect recall. They do not experience cognitive fatigue after the 30th patient of the day.
Therefore, we can deduce that the AI likely excelled in domains requiring exhaustive information gathering and strict adherence to protocol.
Yes.
It ensures every single relevant question regarding family history, social determinants of health, and prior interventions is systematically asked and recorded. It is likely superior at providing comprehensive, perfectly structured summaries of the patient's narrative to ensure alignment.
So it handles the massive administrative and data gathering burden flawlessly, which theoretically frees up the human physician's cognitive bandwidth to focus entirely on hunting for those subtle red flags and managing the complex physical exam.
It perfectly validates the hypothesis of the triadic teammate. But this validation immediately introduces the most critical operational hurdle: system safety.
Oh, right.
If we have established that this multimodal AI is highly capable of holding fluent, complex medical conversations and analyzing video feeds, how do the engineers mathematically guarantee that it will not suddenly hallucinate a dangerous treatment plan mid-sentence?
Right. If the AI is acting as the co-clinician, conducting the intake interview while the doctor reviews the chart, how do we engineer absolute trust? How do we prevent the system from going rogue? DeepMind's answer to this existential safety question is what the text refers to as a dual-agent architecture.
The dual-agent architecture is a masterclass in safety-critical systems design. You cannot simply deploy a monolithic language model into a clinical environment because the mathematical mechanics of token generation are inherently probabilistic.
And therefore prone to occasional hallucination.
Exactly. DeepMind solves this by bifurcating the AI into two distinct specialized modules: the planner and the talker.
This architecture is brilliant. The talker agent is the outward-facing module. It manages the multimodal interface, processes the audio and video, and generates the natural, empathetic, conversational responses to the patient. It's designed for low latency and conversational fluidity.
The talker maintains the illusion of seamless interaction.
But the talker operates under the absolute dictatorial control of the second module, the planner. The planner does not interact with the patient. It sits entirely in the background, operating as an autonomous, hypervigilant supervisor.
We can conceptualize the planner as a highly constrained analytical logic engine. As the talker attempts to generate a response token by token, the planner is continuously monitoring that output stream.
Just watching it like a hawk.
Right. It cross-references the talker's intended statements against a massive localized vector database of validated clinical guidelines and safety parameters.
So if the talker begins to generate a sentence that violates a clinical protocol or attempts to prescribe a medication without the proper diagnostic prerequisites, the planner instantly detects the deviation.
And crucially, the planner intercepts and blocks that output before the audio is ever synthesized or transmitted to the patient.
Wow.
It overrides the talker's conversational flow and forces a structural correction, ensuring the interaction remains rigidly confined within verified medical boundaries. It is a real-time, algorithmic system of checks and balances.
And to further reinforce this safety net, the source notes that the AI co-clinician relies on rigorous evidence verification. It doesn't just pull facts from the ether of its pre-training data, it actively retrieves clinical-grade evidence and provides real-time citation checking.
This is fundamental for physician adoption. When the AI suggests a diagnostic pathway to the human doctor, it provides the specific citations from the medical literature supporting that pathway.
So the physician is not forced to blindly trust a black box algorithm.
Exactly. They can instantly audit the AI's reasoning by reviewing the cited evidence. It engineers trust through total transparency.
So what does this all mean? We have dissected an incredibly complex system, a dual-agent, multimodal AI capable of processing live video, catching omission errors, and matching doctors in open-ended pharmacological reasoning. It is a technological marvel, but we have to transition from the laboratory simulations to the reality of the global healthcare system. Where is this technology actually heading, and what are the operational realities of deployment?
DeepMind is executing a highly deliberate, phased approach to global rollout. The research highlights active collaborations across a diverse array of healthcare settings, specifically listing the US, India, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and the UAE.
That geographic diversity is not just a public relations exercise. It's an infrastructural necessity. Medicine is not practiced uniformly across the globe.
Far from it. The operational reality of clinical deployment dictates that a model trained exclusively on data from highly resourced academic medical centers in Boston or San Francisco will fail spectacularly when deployed in a rural clinic in India.
Right.
The infrastructure is entirely different. The United States relies heavily on complex, legacy electronic medical record systems. India's healthcare infrastructure is increasingly mobile first.
Furthermore, the clinical generalizability must be validated globally. The prevalence of specific diseases varies wildly by region. A model optimized for a North American population might lack the necessary sensitivity to accurately diagnose tropical infectious diseases common in Southeast Asia.
It also must account for resource constraints. It is clinically useless for an AI to suggest an immediate functional MRI for a patient in a region where the nearest MRI machine is 500 miles away. The system must learn to formulate diagnostic plans that are actually actionable within the specific infrastructural realities of the local healthcare system. Testing across these 6 diverse nations ensures the architecture can adapt to varying operational constraints.
But even with rigorous global testing, there is a massive reality check embedded in this research. The source material features a very prominent, explicit disclaimer attached to the AI Co-Clinician. These tools are entirely in the research phase. They are not currently intended for use in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease.
This raises an important question, though, because that disclaimer represents the vast chasm between a successful simulation and a viable commercial medical product. The regulatory frameworks governing healthcare technology are incredibly dense, and for good reason.
Moving an AI from a controlled study with resident actors into a live clinic with real, vulnerable patients triggers a cascade of legal and regulatory hurdles. In the United States, this software would likely fall under the FDA's software as a medical device, or SaMD regulations, which require exhaustive clinical trials to prove efficacy and safety.
Beyond regulatory clearance, there are immense operational hurdles regarding data privacy, such as HIPAA compliance when you are streaming live, unencrypted video of a patient's physical examination into a cloud-based server to be processed by a multimodal model.
And then there's the ultimate legal hurdle: malpractice liability. If the AI co-clinician operates as a teammate and the AI fails to surface a critical piece of information, an error of omission, and the human doctor also misses it, resulting in patient harm, who bears the legal liability?
Right. Is it the physician for failing to catch the AI's error? Is it the hospital system for deploying the software? Or is it the technology company that engineered the model?
You don't know.
The legal frameworks for algorithmic liability in a triadic care model simply do not exist yet. The technology is advancing far faster than our jurisprudence.
That is exactly why this phased, highly controlled rollout is necessary. They are proving the mathematical safety of the architecture before attempting to navigate the legal minefield of actual deployment.
It is a process of building the clinical evidence base required to eventually shift the regulatory paradigm.
Let's summarize the immense ground we have covered today for you all listening. We began by examining the WHO's projection of a 10 million health worker shortage, a systemic collapse that AI is desperately needed to mitigate. We tracked DeepMind's evolution from MedPaLM's multiple-choice mastery to the dynamic text chats of AMIE, arriving finally at the paradigm-shifting AI co-clinician.
We explored the philosophy of triadic care, integrating the AI as a teammate to augment rather than replace human judgment. We analyzed the rigorous no-harm evaluations, specifically the algorithmic challenge of preventing errors of omission and the system's ability to mirror human proficiency in open-ended pharmacological reasoning on the RxQA benchmark.
We then dove into the multimodal leap, giving the AI eyes and ears to process real-time video and audio, allowing it to correct inhaler techniques and guide shoulder exams. And while human doctors still hold the edge in catching red flags and guiding complex exams, the AI is already matching them in nearly half of all consultation metrics, kept in check by a brilliant planner and talker dual-agent architecture.
It is a remarkable synthesis of systems engineering and clinical necessity. But as we consider the future implications of this triadic model, the source material inadvertently raises a deeply provocative question about the psychology of patient care.
We have focused entirely on whether the doctor can trust the AI, but what about the patient?
Exactly. The simulations proved humans are the ultimate safety net for complex diagnoses. Therefore, the AI is relegated to handling the routine data gathering, the exhaustive histories, and the initial patient interactions. But consider the operational nature of that AI talker agent. It's algorithmically optimized to be perfectly patient. It never experiences burnout. It is completely immune to the systemic pressures of a crowded clinic. It can be programmed to exhibit infinite, unwavering empathy, no matter how many times a patient asks the same question.
And human doctors, as we established at the beginning, are buckling under the weight of a 10 million worker shortage. They are chronically exhausted, rushed, and forced to compress complex emotional interactions into 8-minute billing windows. Their bedside manner inevitably suffers under that structural pressure.
Which forces us to ask, as the multimodal interfaces become indistinguishable from human interaction, and the AI co-clinician handles the majority of the direct conversational interface with perfect, unyielding patience.
Wait, you're saying?
Will there come a point where patients actually prefer the bedside manner of the machine over the rushed, exhausted human doctor?
If medicine is a team sport, what happens to the entire structure of the healthcare system when the patient decides their favorite, most comforting teammate is the artificial intelligence? That is a profound paradigm shift to consider as this technology moves from simulation to reality. Thank you for joining us on this rigorous exploration of the future of clinical AI. Keep analyzing the systems around you, and we will see you on the next deep dive.